Hello to all listeners. This is Renaud and I am with Paul Adams. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Hi there. Yes, very well, thank you. Good to
Great.
be back.
And this is episode 186 of the China Manufacturing Decoded podcast. And today we are covering a product development framework that some of our clients mention from time to time. And so some of our clients use that to sort of gauge the progress, especially I noticed, especially in their prototyping efforts. And it seems to be helpful in some cases. So it is called TRL, the Technology Readiness Level. Okay, so sort of a product maturity level, if you want, right? And we're going to cover this in this episode, starting with where did it actually originate, right? These kind of things usually come from somewhere. The especially Western USA framework for consumer electronics of EVT, DVT, PVT seems like it came from Motorola. You know, these different frameworks tend to come from a certain place, like a certain company or institution. So what about this one? Where did it appear? What kind of industry did it come from?
Well, this was originated from, believe it or not, NASA.
Mm,
And they needed a framework, and this was back in the 1970s. So this framework's been around a long time.
mm,
And it's still valid today, to be fair. But
mm,
what we have to remember is we need to put everything into context, obviously. And because this was NASA developing a system or a framework that they could follow to ensure that they were getting each of their stages, as it were, correct before they move into the next stage of development. They come up with this framework, and they called it Technology Readiness Level. Now, each of
mm.
the levels, there's one would assume that there's a stage gate or a process
Right.
review or something like this,
Mm,
and it was basically developed for building a spacecraft. So
right.
which
Mm.
is a low quantity, one-off, handmade, very specialized piece of equipment, obviously.
Yes, and
Uh,
yeah, you really mentioned the keywords here, and we'll get back to that later. This is not really for mass production usually. So, but it is an interesting framework. It's been also adopted by the EU Space Agency or whatever they call it. And the way I understand it is that NASA and that EU agency tend to work in the same way, thinking that, okay, let's develop something, it's new. We develop some of it ourselves, or we work with, contractors like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and so on. And but when they build it for us, we need also to follow up on the progress because it might take 5 years, but and we finance them, but we have to see some progress, right? So in that case, it makes sense to see, oh, okay, what level of technology readiness is this, whatever this module or this entire spacecraft? And maybe I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure that what happens is that as they get it validated, okay, this is now level 3, you get some funding. Okay, now this is level 4 is validated. We confirm that. Okay, then you get some more funding to get to level 5 and so on and so forth. All right. I think that's why they really needed to codify it, but it also obviously gives them visibility into the progress and to
yeah.
plan ahead for each one of the different modules and subsystems and so on that needed to be developed. Otherwise, there's no way to plan for an entire mission that's years ahead, right? So let's actually go into these 9 levels of technology readiness, and let's go through them one by one and try to understand a little bit about what it means, right? So what is level 1, technology readiness level 1?
Well, I'm going to lump 1 and 2
Mm,
into one bucket, as it were, and this
mm,
one bucket or umbrella is the basic research. Okay, so we've got technology ready at level 1, and level 2 are all about getting the basic research completed and done. So the first level is where we're looking at the basic principles, and where you're getting down your specifications, and you're creating your reports and all of the documentation that will support the product. Now, bearing in mind this is, based around sort of spacecraft, it needs to be very, very specific on the directions of each of the elements and components. But because this is basic research, we need to understand that we have to have things documented down to start with. So one would assume that so you've got your basic report that will outline the basic principles of the design of the product itself. So that's level 1. So once you've got that done, then you can move into the second level, where we look at the sort of the technology a little bit deeper, and that's where we start to look at the calculations and some of the materials that are potentially going to be used for building the components themselves, and understanding the technology from the next level down, or maybe several levels deeper, with respect to what that concept you're trying to develop is. So the basic research is really technology level ready 1 and level 2, where you've got your initial report that gives you the sign off with respect to, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take, call it SpaceX, for example. We're building the biggest, heaviest rocket in the world to take up multiple satellites to space. And oh, by the way, we want it to come back and sort of land. So that's sort of very groundbreaking technology. They didn't just start with a prototype, they needed to start with somewhere. So, and that would be your basic report. So level 2, that's where we're going to see some calculations coming in with respect to, backing up the initial sort of, report put forward with respect to this is what the idea is. Level 2 is backing it up with calculations.
Right. So, let's try to take a concrete example. For example, if they need something for heat dissipation, and they might think, okay, well, copper would be a good metal, right? And this would be level 1, like we have an idea. And then level 2 would be, hey, let's actually calculate how much copper we know, what thickness and what area of the spacecraft to cover, and so on and so forth, and how fast it would dissipate the heat, and how hot it would still get, and so on. And they would do some calculations to confirm that it can reach this objective with this geometry, let's say, and that and maybe they would also do some calculation, maybe on or maybe not calculations, but maybe some thinking of, hey, what are the risks here? What could go wrong? What are the top, 10 sources of risk, and so on, right? So you formulate it, you formulate your concept, right? So this is level 2. This is still mostly theoretical, but it could actually be a start of a proof of concept. With maybe you have an easy way to test it, to put it together and test, maybe at a very small scale, right? Much smaller. And do a little bit of testing, and you already learn a lot from that. So that's in a very simple way, right? That would still be technology readiness level 2, I think. So what about the next one?
Well, the next one's are really good. We really should take those one at a time, because there's quite a bit going on here, and this is a complex system we're building. So TRL 3 or level 3 is really, you mentioned proof of concept there. This is really where we do start to look at proof of concept and validating all of these, particularly the critical functions within the system itself. Okay, so we're breaking this down. We're looking at this from an experimental point of view, from making sure all of the critical functions are covered, looking at the risks, obviously, of every single aspect, and validating all of those through a proof of concept. And it's basically a continuous cycle. So you've got your analytical and experimental activities going in, whether that be a computer simulation or, calculations or whatever the case may be, then you build out your proof of concept, to prove that hypothesis is actually correct and it can actually move forward. Once that system's done, then we've actually sort of passed level 3. So we're actually getting into the meat of actually putting some stuff together. There's the real engineering side of things. So this is where we're looking at particularly on the critical functions. Okay, that's super important.
So starting to put together a proof of concept and testing it actually is level 3. Sorry. So level 2 is purely conceptual, thinking of risks and doing calculations to validate the concept. Yeah, level 3 is to start to keep going deeper into the analysis, but also start to do a simple proof of concept. Yeah, that makes sense. So once we have that, what is level 4?
Well, then we can actually start. Now we've got the critical functions out of the way. Then we can start to look at the other components and start to build that out. Whether that be the electronics on a simple breadboard or, a simple prototype PCB. We're looking at some laboratory environmental testing. So we're really moving forward through the development process here. And again, we're looking at more validation of more of a complete system. So once we've got that, that's basically what level 4 is all about.
So it's really, let's actually try to make it work. To put something together, the different elements in a simple way to get it to work. But this is in a laboratory environment, right? A very controlled environment. Just to see how things interact and what the result is, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And sort of, it's very controlled. I think that's the key thing here. In an environmental simulation. Okay. So it's going to be a laboratory sort of environment where we're going to be testing either components or subsystems or subassemblies and breaking it down and moving each subassembly through that process. To understand, going back to the copper board, this will be a typical area where we expect we're not going to build the 1-to-1 scale. Maybe we build a 1 to 20 scale, 1 to 50 scale, and actually go through that process with respect to, okay, these are the calculations. Let's actually subject this copper plate to some heat that we're expecting and analyze the results.
Right. So, okay. So all this is done in a controlled setting, sort of in a lab setting.
Yeah.
What about the next level 5?
Well, this is where we try to actually move out of the lab and into a relevant environment. Now, it's not always easy if you're talking about a spacecraft. However, that we could potentially get sort of product into, semi-orbit via various different mechanisms these days. That's not a difficult thing. But it's really a case of validating again. This is all about validating components, sub-assemblies, and key components in the relevant environment.
That's the key. This is the key words here. Start to put it in relevant environment. And again, this is a very simple sort of rough prototype, right?
That's right. Yeah. And really it's down to the component or a sub-assembly level. Smaller. There's certainly not a complete spacecraft at this point, for sure.
Okay. So what is level 6?
Well, we just mentioned sub-assemblies and building the system. This is where we actually start. Level 6 is really about building a model scaled prototype of the final product and demonstrating in a relevant environment, whether that be in the ground or up in space or wherever the case may be. That is where we're actually starting to see the product come together. It's got some life now. It may be a scaled model, but it's certainly a functional model that is testing all of the systems together. All of the subsystems are talking to each other, and it's got a full functionality going on.
Right.
So, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of when we were talking about sort of the funding, and this is obviously a critical stage. Well, each of these is a critical stage. I think every time we go through, and I think the whole framework here is all about making sure that each of these levels is ready in order to move forward to the next level. And this will be a very good example with respect to, okay, level 6, we need a lot of funding here. So you need to make sure that 1 to 5 is crystal clear and already been pre-approved by the stakeholders.
Oh yeah, I mean, getting from 5 to 6 might take 2 years of work.
Oh, easy. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
In
So, when we've got 6 done, once we've demonstrated the actual system itself and we've got a scaled model that's working, then we then step it up a gear. Level 7 is all about the system prototype and demonstrating in a space environment, bearing in mind that we're going to go back to this is a NASA framework from the 70s. Okay. And basically this is where we are getting product up into space. Okay. This is where we would say where the rubber meets the road. In their case, this is where we meet space. So this whole system this could be a scaled model or it could be a 1-to-1 model. It's basically they're going to send this system up into space, and again they're going to be monitoring, measuring all of the aspects with every single component, every subsystem, or everything. They're going to be monitoring everything on that, and this is not the final sign off with respect to this is the final product. This is still a prototype that's going up into space. You've got to remember that.
Yeah, right. So then once we have the whole system has been prototyped and demonstrated that it worked okay in the right environment, what is the next level? Level 8?
Well, it is. It's level 8, and I'm not sure what this is. Whether it's a paperwork exercise, whether it's a funding exercise, or whether it's like turning the wrenches exercise. But this is where the actual system has completed its flight, what they call a flight qualified test and demonstration. And that's basically the approval to move on to go launch, as it were, which will be level 9. So, level 8 is really all about it's completing the actual system. Everything was functional. Nothing failed. The flight was a success. Whether that comes back to Earth or stays up in space and circulates, it is a success.
It's no longer a prototype there. It's what they call the actual system. So the engineering designs got to be finalized, pretty much finalized, let's say, right? And they might validate it again in the relevant environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and again, it's all about sort of qualifying and making sure that everything's okay, ready for the final stage, which will be at level 9. Now, level 9 is all systems go. We get the countdown, and basically we're building the final product. Now, again, this is a one-off. It's very, very specialized, and it's not mass production at all, by any stretch of the imagination, but very, very specific in their controls and the measures and what they're doing on developing this particular product. And what they're calling level 9 is like a flight proven through success or a successful mission operation. And that's their quick description of level 9. And that basically means it's all system go. Everything's been proven. So each level has been very, very tightly controlled with respect to what is the deliverables, what are the objectives and what are the deliverables. And you're not allowed to move forward until that has been met. And then level 9 is let's go launch. Right.
And let's go down. Also, the higher in the levels, okay, of course, the closest it is to being ready for use in an actual mission, maybe in a high-stake mission, but also the more reliable, because already in level 7 and 8, they could actually use it. They test it, they validate it, they find it works in the right environment. But level 9 is really okay. It's reliable enough. We can use it, and there's a low chance that it will malfunction, fail, maybe if it's part of the engine, maybe blow the whole thing up. It's relatively reliable, right? And that's the idea here. and they stop at level 9. Okay, now it's interesting because this was, again, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. This has been used, and some of our, especially European clients, sometimes they say, well, we're at TRL5, and then they expect us to understand, okay, all right, so you have a rough proof of concept that's actually working, all right. So there's still a lot of work. You don't have maybe your custom PCBA designed and so on yet. You don't have, right? It's maybe the enclosure is not designed the right way to be plastic injection molded, for example. Maybe you haven't completed the selection of the, I don't know, some of the components, maybe the camera, maybe some sensors and so on. Okay, we understand that. That's fine. But the problem is this really something that can be used for products to be mass produced? Not really. And let's go back to to spacecraft development in 2023. So, and look at SpaceX, because they really do pushing the envelope. But it's not just SpaceX. It's what's it called, Blue Origin by Jeff Bezos, which is kind of doing the same thing with a few years behind. And
Virgin Galactic as well.
Virgin Galactic is but that's really geared toward like tourism, right? Whereas Blue Origin and SpaceX, they're really for, okay, there's some demand for putting satellites up and maybe more, right? So these two in the USA anyway are pushing the envelope, and both of them have been working on reusable rockets. Okay, so and probably the other ones are also working in that direction, but I don't really see it. Like the Ariane European launcher is not really, it's still like good old NASA with Boeing and Lockheed, just thinking of one-time launchers that can be reused and things that are very slow and very expensive. So anyway, let's look at cutting edge 2023 rocket manufacturing. Well, you mentioned before, SpaceX has been working on the biggest rocket, right? And they call it what, the Starship? Yeah, Starship. It's going to be huge. It's going to lift, so much payload because that's the way to reduce the cost of putting 1 ton or 1 kg of gear in orbit. All right. And the way they're developing it actually is much closer to mass production. Remember, Elon Musk learned a lot about mass production when he had to ramp up production of the Tesla Model S and Model 3 and so on. So he's learned quite a bit about that, and he's trying to apply these learnings to SpaceX. He wants to be able to churn out at least one of these Starship rockets per month. All right. That's what came out in the biography by Walter Isaacson of Elon Musk, because he's thinking, still thinking, okay, we got to get to Mars. Okay, but we need to sustain a colony. Like, we got to send the rockets like at least 1,000 times up. So, we can't do it with just 1 or 2 Starship. This has to be much closer to mass production. Right?
Going to be a fleet. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One a month to a car manufacturer is sounds like a joke, because a car factory, churned out a new car in less than a minute. But for that industry, it's really much closer to mass production than what NASA and the EU Space Agency and others have been working on. So this model here is really showing its limits, because there's nothing about the manufacturing readiness level, right? Which is another interesting concept that we refer to sometimes when a client says, well, we could use this like that, and this material with this process, and we're like, is the manufacturing really ready, right? Just like, for example, when Steve Jobs was pushing for Gorilla Glass, right? Everybody told him, no, we got to do it in plastic. The iPhones get to have a plastic display. And then Jobs was like, he thought about it and he said, no way, it's got to be glass.
Yeah.
And everybody said, no, forget it, it's really impossible. Well, he went to see, Corning, I guess, one of the big glass manufacturers. And said, well, we've been developing this, maybe it's going to work, right? So this was still relatively low manufacturing readiness level, but then they made it work with, extreme dedication from a number of engineers, obviously. And they did take some risks here, but it went well. But there's some other manufacturers, what was that, of a Sapphire, or I don't know, some new kinds of displays that committed to doing certain things for Apple, did not deliver and went straight into bankruptcy. I mean, they built a new factory to make it and so on and so forth, but the manufacturing readiness level was so poor, and they did not improve it on time, and they just went out of business. So you get to really think also of the manufacturing process, and maybe we can cover what is missing, right? What is it that's missing? So when you are up to level 9, it means that, you have a prototype, but it might only be just one prototype that actually does the job in the environment where it's supposed to do the job, and so on and so forth. And we could think also it looks good, right? Because it's not really a consideration for for rockets, or whatever. But some of these systems are hidden inside, or maybe it's a rover, maybe it's whatever that's supposed to be used in space. So let's say there's a work like and look like prototype that has been validated, that is okay. Well, let's get back to relatively mainstream electronic products, right? What is missing here? What would be the next logical steps?
Well, I think if we're looking at comparing the NASA system or the framework and what we typically sort of run within our business, it's there's quite a bit missing. To be fair, there's quite a bit missing.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you're going to be looking at producing or developing a consumer electronics product, one of the things you've got to look at is marketing. For example, is there a sort of market for the product? How are you going to market it? So these are, okay, we're talking about the final product and how many it can sell. However, that is all part of the feasibility and potentially goes through into the prototype phases that we used to with respect to confirming their product, not just from a manufacturing point of view, but should we actually manufacture? And going back to sort of the glass manufacturers, maybe they missed out the feasibility step. This is a key aspect with respect to the feasibility study carried out with respect to, can we actually produce this glass for this brand new out of this world iPhone that Steve Jobs came up with back in the day. Maybe they went straight to the prototype, and we see this quite a lot of the times. Sort of people come to us with respect to developing a new product, and they want to jump straight into the prototype. Which is a big mistake. They have to go through that feasibility study to start with, which we can sort of discuss later. However, some of the areas that are missing within the TRL are having those multiple prototypes, because it's such a specialized system, because it's such a specialized sort of product. Maybe it is the Mars rover, even so, that's maybe the size of a car. I'm not sure the actual physical size of it, but it's going to be very complex. And how many prototypes you're going to be building of this? Maybe you could build a few, maybe you could build sort of a number of prototypes, but it's really a case of looking at these other, what we want to call peripheral activities that go on in a general high mass production consumer product, not even considered in the framework for sort of TRL, not even considered, because they don't need to. Who's the customer? We're the customer. NASA, SpaceX. We are the customer. We're building our own product, for our own use. Unlike somebody that's developing a consumer product that is going to be targeting millions of people potentially. They need to validate that aspect to start with. None of that is considered. Tooling, for example, that you may need to very, very specialized tooling when it comes to developing and creating and producing anything that goes up into space, particularly specialized materials. But once it's made, it's made. And even if we're talking about SpaceX creating 1,000 rockets, maybe it's just 1,000. When it comes to consumer electronics, that's hardly worth creating any injection mold tools or anything for. It's such a low quantity. So one, it's all about ownership with respect to who the product's for, with respect to how things are validated with respect to that moving forward. Two, looking at the market where it goes into, who's the product intended for, and it's very, very different mindset with respect to how you think and how you brainstorm all of the questions with respect to what needs to be answered in both of the frameworks. I'm talking about both frameworks. I'm talking about the TRL with respect to the traditional one-off, specific, very specialized product, or take, for example, our new product introduction process, where we generally look at consumer products for the mass production.
Right. So a lot of things missing here. So TRL is something that guides product development, and one thing that is missing is the development of the process, which the manufacturing process and also testing process and so on. So what is missing here is the idea about DFM, design for manufacturing, design for assembly, design for testability, things of that nature are missing. So if I were to take this TRL framework and adapt it to products to be made in mass production, I would inject that. And also, yes, feasibility study, with regard to, manufacturability and so on, right? Same general idea. This is missing. And then really on top of it, when you get to level 7, 8, 9, well, you get to really transfer it to manufacturing, right? So the big blind spot is thinking of the manufacturing process. And that's why we don't really use this framework internally. It's relatively risky, I think. That's how you get to people who have a prototype and sell the moon, but then they cannot deliver anything, right?
Yeah.
And Kickstarter and Indiegogo are littered by these types of projects, but not just there. It's so common. It's really sad. So you get to do your feasibility study and really confirm that on the technical side, the concept you're designing is really going to be manufacturable, right? Otherwise, and manufacturable at a certain level of quality and reliability and so on and so forth, and is going to be compliant, etc. Right? In certain industries, actually, you don't have a choice. There's regulations depending on where you sell, right? So if you sell medical devices in the EU or in the US, or among others, right, you're going to be forced to work on the transfer to manufacturing, right? In the US FDA 21 CFR says it clearly. There's, they give you some, also again, some buzzwords like, IQ, OQ, PQ, and so on, right? When you say, okay, it's going to be made this way, it's going to be on that type of equipment for manufacturing. Okay, well, test it, get the supplier to make it, and then maybe if it's going to be made, okay, it's going to be made in this facility, then in this facility you get to have the equipment, make a few samples and confirm, and then not just a few samples, but when you get to PQ, you have to qualify the performance, that's what they call it, do a pilot run and actually confirm capability of the process. okay, on that equipment, on the methods and so on that you were planning, and you get to actually show that yes, we can make it consistently in a relatively small series, and we have a plan for making it in larger series. If you're planning to make large mass production type of series, okay, yeah, it's not just 21 FDA 21 CFR, IQ, OQ, PQ, something a bit similar anyway in ISO 13485, and then you have the country-specific regulations, like the EU medical device regulation, and so on, that push you in that direction anyway.
As you say, you've got no choice. You have to go
exactly
through that in order to get regulated and certified.
Yeah. Exactly. In automotive parts, same thing. You have to follow the APQP, Advanced Product Quality Plan, as defined in the IATF 16949 standard, right? It's one of the core tools, as they call it, and they force you to design and develop the process in parallel as you are designing and developing the product, the automotive part, right? You got to make sure that you can make it at the right volume and at the right quality. And you get to make sure that, there's a large number of requirements, and typically the customer will give you sort of a checklist. That's the PPAP. This is everything that we need from you to validate that you can actually make it capacity and quality, right? But the thing is, when you go to a lot of B2B or consumer products, there's no such regulations that apply, right? And then people sort of apply whatever framework they want. And that's a bit dangerous, because when it feels like you're free, but you have to follow these, some guidelines at least of good practices. Otherwise, your entire project might just go belly up, right? That's the risk
of not following a process. Yeah, correct.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You get to have a gated process, step by step, validate that you're going in the right direction and you're building your product on a solid foundation. So that was an interesting overview. Thanks a lot, Paul.
No, that was good and interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I hope that our listeners get some value out of it. Thanks again, Paul, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back as usual next week. Thanks a lot and have a good one.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.